All right, let's dive right into a huge question that's bubbling up all over global finance. Is the world getting ready to break up with the US dollar? Now, this isn't just some stuffy economic debate. Nope. This is a story that impacts pretty much everything, from how countries trade with each other to the money sitting in your own bank account. So, let's get into it.
And yeah, that really is the central question here. Is the world actually breaking up with the dollar? You've probably seen this word, de-dollarization, popping up in the headlines, right? Especially when you hear about countries like Russia, China, and the other BRICS nations. But what does it really mean? And is this a genuine threat to the dollar's top dog status? That's what we're here to unpack.
So before we can even talk about a breakup, we got to understand the relationship. And let's be clear, for the last, 70 plus years, the US dollar has been the undisputed king of the currency world.
To really get why it's so powerful, you have to understand this one term, reserve currency. Just think of it like this. When you travel abroad, you swap your cash for the local currency, right? Well, countries do the exact same thing just on a, massive scale. And the one currency they all trust the most, the one they stockpile in their national savings accounts just in case, that's the reserve currency. It's basically the unofficial language of money for the entire planet.
Now, what's really fascinating here is just how clearly this visual shows the sheer scale of the dollar's power. I mean, just look at that. Around 60% of all the foreign currency reserves that central banks hold are in US dollars. The euro? It's a distant second, way down at 20%. And everybody else, the Chinese yuan, the Japanese yen, the British pound, they're just tiny little slivers of the pie. This isn't just a chart, it's a portrait of the king sitting on his throne.
So how did the dollar get to be so powerful in the first place? Well, it wasn't an accident. First off, the US has the deepest and most liquid financial markets in the world. That just means you can buy and sell trillions of dollars worth of assets, like super easily. Then there's this fundamental trust in American institutions and its rule of law. Throw in the gigantic size of the US economy itself, plus a long history going all the way back to the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II, and well, you've got the perfect recipe for a global superpower currency.
Okay, but that brings us to the real drama of our story, the challenge to all that power. Because right now, a growing number of countries are actively trying to find ways to depend less on that king.
And this whole movement has a name, De-Dollarization. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's a conscious, deliberate effort by nations to step away from using the dollar for their big international deals and to start holding other currencies in their reserves.
So why would they even want to do this? Well, think about it. When your entire economy basically runs on dollars, you are completely at the mercy of whatever the US central bank, the Federal Reserve, decides to do with interest rates. But even more important is that the US can actually weaponize the dollar. It can use sanctions to cut entire countries off from the global financial system. So for nations like China and Russia, creating an alternative isn't just about economics, it's about gaining their own independence and pushing for a world with many global powers, not just one.
And this lays out their vision perfectly. On the left, you've got the current system, with the US dollar smack dab in the middle of everything. But on the right, that's the goal, a new system where trade can happen in local currencies, Russian rubles for Indian rupees, without ever having to be converted into dollars first. The end game is to reduce the amount of leverage any one country can have over everyone else.
But look, having a goal is one thing. Actually pulling it off, that's a whole different story. So let's get real for a minute and look at the practicalities of trying to dethrone the king. Is the dollar's throne really that unshakable?
It's the most obvious question, isn't it? If so many powerful countries want an alternative, why are we all still living in a dollar-dominated world? Well, it turns out that wanting to replace the dollar and actually being able to are two very, very different things.
This checklist really tells you everything you need to know. See, to be the world's go-to currency, you have to check some pretty major boxes. Let's just walk through it. Global trust and stability, the US dollar gets a big green check. A potential competitor, like China's yuan? That's a big question mark for sure. How about deep, open markets where anyone can easily buy and sell? That's another clear check for the dollar, but a hard no for the yuan, which has really strict controls. Is it freely convertible? Yep, for the dollar. Nope, for the yuan. And what about a predictable rule of law? Again, check for the US, another big question mark for the others. You see, you can't just flip a switch. You have to build an entire ecosystem of trust that takes decades.
And all of this leads to a phrase you hear a lot from economists, sometimes shortened to TINA. There is no alternative. The reality is, right now, there just isn't another currency out there that can offer the same cocktail of scale, stability, and trust that the US dollar does. Of course, the two most important words in that sentence are "for now."
So where does this whole conversation leave us? What is the future of money actually going to look like? And what does it all mean for us? Let's try to bring it all together.
Okay, so here's the most crucial takeaway. Any rumors about the death of the dollar are, well, they're greatly exaggerated. It is absolutely not going to disappear overnight. The infrastructure, the trust, the history, it's all just too massive and too deeply wired into the global system for some kind of sudden collapse.
But, and this is a really important but, that does not mean that nothing is changing. The world is slowly, bit by bit, chipping away at the dollar's absolute dominance. We are moving away from a world with one single undisputed king to a world that might have several very important princes. The dollar will almost certainly stay first among equals for a long time, but it might not be the only game in town forever.
So maybe, just maybe, we've been asking the wrong question all along. Maybe the real question isn't if the dollar will be totally replaced, but instead, what will a world with more than one major currency actually look like? What would that mean for the price of gas, for the value of our savings, for the cost of the phone in your hand? We'd be moving from a kind of monarchy to more of a council. That is the future that seems to be taking shape right now, and you can bet we'll be watching it very, very closely. Thanks for joining this explainer.